So I have a question for you guys. Have you guys ever looked through your wardrobe and looked at a shirt, or maybe it was a pair of pants or a pair of shoes? I'm not a big shoe person, so I can't really relate to that. But maybe it's a pair of shoes. And you look through your wardrobe and it's something that you haven't worn in years. Maybe you haven't gone through your closet since, I don't know, 10, maybe 15, 20 years. And you're like, how in the world have I not seen this piece of clothing? And you look at it and you're like, maybe it's bell bottoms, or maybe it's, this flannel shirt that is so ugly. And you're like, I can't believe I wore that. Have you guys ever had that moment? I do. I have a couple pieces of clothing where I'm like, what was I thinking? What was I thinking about wearing this out in public? I should be ashamed of myself. But the really cool thing, this is how it illustrates here, is that going through the wardrobe, something that, was our old self, is that the really cool thing is that we have new clothing. We have new clothing in Christ. In Colossians chapter 3, Paul talks about this new clothing, this new self. Because when we were in our old self, we looked ridiculous. We looked like the world. We acted like the world. We talked like the world. But in Colossians chapter 3, Paul here is saying, put on your new self. So what I'd like for us to do right now, and you guys can talk a little bit more about it in your small group, and hopefully you have some great discussion. But let's jump into Colossians chapter 3, verse 1. Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Verse 2. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things that are of earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, is revealed, then you will be revealed with him in glory. So here Paul is saying, guys, Christ first. Christ first. You are dead to your old self. All the things that have made up you, that you think that are great, like maybe you've held on to bitterness and anger and maybe gossip. Those things are of your old self, but those are no more. And I love that. And I hope that you feel refreshed knowing that you are a new creation in Christ. Because Christ calls us to put on a new clothing. He calls us to put on Jesus. And the really interesting thing here is in verse 5, it says, therefore consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which amounts to idolatry. For it is because of these things that the wrath of God will come upon the sons of disobedience. And in them you also once walked, and when you were living in them. But now you also must put them all aside, anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive speech from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you laid aside the old self with its evil practices, and haven't put on the new self, which is being renewed to true knowledge according to the image of the one who created him. A renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, and free man. But Christ is all and all. I love the writing here, because he says, here's what you once were. This is what you were once doing. That is the part of the old clothing. That is something that is hideous looking and should not be dragged out of the closet. It's something that should just be thrown away and burned, right? Like those bell bottoms, right? Or maybe that old flannel shirt, or that ugly Christmas sweater. But however, those are actually coming back in style. I've heard that if you keep something long enough, it actually will come back into fashion. So, but that's besides the point here, right? It's because we need to get rid of our old self. He makes that list of malice and anger and wrath. But get this here. In verse 12, he says, So, as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other, whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. Beyond all these things, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. So you see there's a huge contrast in Paul's writing. He says, this is what you once were, but now you are this. You are this. Be compassionate, be kind, be loving, humility, be gentle. These are new things. These are traits of what we should be living like. Jesus makes you new, and it changes you. He changes you. In verse 15 it says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts. Do we know what that really means? Do we know what it really means to seek and to have the peace of Christ in our hearts? And I want to challenge you guys this week. Are you living like Christ? Are you displaying compassion? Are you displaying humility? Are you displaying kindness when somebody who is treating you really kind of cruddy? Are you displaying love upon them? That is one of the hardest things you can do, right? But Jesus doesn't call us to an easy life. He calls us to live like Him. He calls us to be above this world and to set our hearts on heavenly things instead of earthly things. And are you going to do that this week? Thanks, guys, for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your small group. God bless.